Saam, Sebastian, welcome.
Spiros,
Thanks for having us.
thank you.
We're here to discuss our fundraise with Greylock doubling down and, of course, Lightspeed leading the round.
Thank you for letting us in.
Of course. I don't know. Do you want to share maybe your perspective on why you decided to do this and work with us? And
I mean, you were here first. You should start.
We have been fortunate to be working with you, I guess, since summer of 2024. It's funny how much the world has changed in 18 months. I feel like the world in the last 18 months, we had 10 years of change in 18 months. And I think you guys were really early to the recognition that software engineering was going to change. Obviously, we've all seen that play out in code and coding, and even just in the last few weeks with the latest capabilities of Cloud Code. I think all of us are seeing that in all of our companies play out even more. And I think our thesis back then was that code would be a really important part of this, but there's a lot more in software engineering than just code. And we could make developers much more productive at writing code, but of course, where do the developers that work at Resolve and all the ones that work at our portfolio companies spend their time? They spend their time in production, dealing with all sorts of issues, ranging from optimizing the underlying software in production, figuring out how to optimize cost, and of course, when there's incidents and outages, someone gets paged and woken up and has to go in and try to resolve that incident, and those incidents are incredibly costly. And it's exciting to be working with Lightspeed on Resolve. It's one of now multiple companies that Lightspeed and Greylock have partnered on together, focused on this broader problem, right, dating back to AppDynamics almost a decade ago. So I think for us, Resolve and Spiros, your and Mayank's thesis around building an agentic approach to the production side of software engineering, we feel is the foundation for a very, very large company, and it has been amazing to see what's happened in the last year.
I think incredibly well put. I think we've obviously seen this up close through Anthropic. We've seen the rise of coding, and I absolutely agree. It was just a matter of time until the pressure on what happens post, the writing of code, what happens in production. There was going to be more and more pressure on that, and we're seeing that now. And I think for us, we spent probably 6 months last year canvassing the space. I think probably in the summer, these products, what you've built really started to work finally, right? The product started to get to a maturity level where it started to be useful for folks. Then we met you, we met the team. We always thought there was this problem really needed both an AI team and an observability team. It's really those two skill sets that have to come together. And then I'll share a couple of anecdotes because so much of what we do as investors is, of course, we need to be excited about this space. We want to be in these really big markets, right? But at the end of the day, you need the team that actually executes against that market, right? And I have two anecdotes, and I know you've heard them from me before, but I think they're just so important. During our diligence, we came here on a Sunday once, right? And we walked in here, it was 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and there were 40 people in the office. Right? That was the first moment for all of us from Lightspeed. Once we left, we're like, we probably need to work with these people. And then there was another instant, which was, in my view, just as important, which was the week later, we were in the office again, and we're sitting in one of the conference rooms here, and you brought in a few of your other leaders, and they started sort of making fun of you, in front of you. And the reason
it happens all the time.
And I think it's good because on Sunday what we saw was the intensity that you have in the office, right? Which is what you need. This is a really difficult journey, and you have to run really hard. But then 4 days later we saw the intensity comes with a really good culture as well, right? And when I see a younger employee be able to be himself in front of you or herself in front of you and a little bit make fun of you, that's a good sign, right? So I think you've built a really special culture. That's what you need. It'll be a really difficult journey from here. So the team is super important, and yeah, on top of everything you said about the trend, that was critical for us.
I think I would never think that I'd be able to get a top tier investor in the company by being funny.
I know. Who would have thought?
He said your team was funny. I don't think he said you were funny, but
Fair enough. But anyway, listen, it's an amazing place to be. I mean, as a founder, having Greylock and Lightspeed as investors is something I would never think in my dreams it would happen. So, it's an amazing place to be. I feel grateful for what we're building, for the time we find ourselves in, for actually building an AI at the forefront of it, right? Trying to solve problems that have never been solved before. It is an amazing opportunity, and I really appreciate your support. I have huge conviction that AI for production and this side of software engineering is going to be as important and as big of a market as what we've seen with AI and coding, right? But I want to ask you, what is your thesis, right? What made you invest in the company, and what made you, Sam, double down?
Yeah, Sam alluded to it already a little bit, but look, the creation of code is ultimately just a small piece of what contributes to building successful software products that can actually be used in production, right? I think we've all heard these stats, right? Today it's, the normal engineer already spends 70% of his or her time actually maintaining software in production. That's always been the much bigger problem in many ways, right? And now we obviously have that even being emphasized because you have every individual developer creating more code, you have more people creating code. I now hear it frequently that you have lots of actually product people now building in cloud code. It's no longer just the software engineers. So all of a sudden,
even CEOs.
Even CEOs, please don't. But so the problem is getting much bigger, right? And then I think there's just this massive paradigm shift, obviously now in terms of how maintaining software code in production is happening, right? We're coming from a world where there was a bunch of humans staring at graphs and charts and going back and forth between different systems to address a problem that was emerging. That's all changing, right? It's now really these swarms of agents that are being unleashed on sort of the data that you contextualize and then try to find the ultimate root cause for problems, right? So it's a completely different paradigm. Again, like I said earlier, I think it takes a completely different type of founding team to solve that. I think a lot of these sort of almost like new application type companies will look a lot more like infrastructure companies today because the user of these new software products is a very different one. Again, it's not the human eyeball that looks at charts and graphs. It's agents that want to consume contextually very rich information, and then it becomes much more of an infrastructure problem, right? And so, that's why we think it's such a big problem and why it's so nuanced in terms of how you have to solve it, who you need in terms of people to solve that. And it's also both a model problem and an engineering problem as well, right? So I'm really excited about us becoming a model company as well. Just before it started, we talked a bit about that, right? We're really now starting to be a model company as well. And we always thought as we did our diligence, that was the logical next step, right? So, lots to do this year, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, like one maybe way I think about Resolve, or we think Resolve may be slightly different from, AI application companies, is that we think of ourselves as a full stack company. We believe that, if you want to, this is a huge market with many, many, many difficult problems that are not addressed well by the models today. So to solve this problem well, obviously we need to build agents, but we need to build actually, or do a lot of the modeling work supporting these agents to solve these like long horizon tasks or difficult production tasks that even humans have a hard time solving. And today, coincidentally, we have pushed our first homegrown model to production that supports a bunch of the use cases that Resolve is being used for.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, it's interesting. We were talking about this internally at Greylock the other day. Like, it's so hard right now in the talent market to recruit AI talent, right? Because you have Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, and one of the tells for us, you're asking like, hey, why did we double down? And it's all about people, as you said, Spiros. And I've always been struck that I think you're one of maybe the only company that's not one of the 3 or 4 major sort of foundation model labs that has been able to recruit talent away from those labs and into Resolve. And I think, why does that talent come here? It's because we're building that full stack company. And it's because we're not just building the harness and connecting that to a really valuable customer problem, but in order to solve our customer's problem, we have to go down to the model layer. And so I think that the talent sort of speaks to that as well.
Yeah, and the lesson I had in building the company so far, right? Because we had the thesis from the beginning, Sam, like you mentioned. But what we learned along the way is that dealing with production, having AI that can deal with production, requires to understand code, telemetry, and telemetry itself is very different if you're dealing with logs versus, let's say, time series data. You have infrastructure, which itself is dynamic and very complex. And on top of all of that, you have these systems that are not really documented, right? The documentation lives in tools, in human minds, and documents sometimes that are often outdated, right? They're wrong, actually.
Yeah.
So in building actually kind of, let's say, AI for prod and even solving these problems, we realized that we have to be able to understand all these types of data very, very well, right? And the context is huge, a lot more than when you're dealing with just one type of data. Yeah. So that requires deep domain expertise, but also deep expertise in models and even like how you build agents on top of these models. So the shape of the company today is actually different than I even expected, right? Like we have essentially a very strong product and UI team, right? Because the user interface is very different than before. We have a very strong modeling, let's say, or a team that builds agents and agent infrastructure, and now we're building our own models to be able to push further than where we can go, let's say, with the existing models.
By the way, what you just said, exactly what you just said is also one of the reasons why we really felt that it requires a dedicated player to go after this problem, right? Obviously, as investors, we ask ourselves all day long, okay, is this something that Anthropic is going to do, OpenAI is going to do, et cetera? And they're going to do lots of things, right? But in this particular use case, there is more that's needed than what the model companies have today. Again, it's the mix of observability and models, but it's also a different data source, right? Like what you said, right? It's you got to go into these organizations and get data that only lives in your customers, right? You have to get a lot of that tribal knowledge that sits in people's heads. That's not stuff that is today in the normal kind of training data distribution that these large labs use, right? So we think this really requires a dedicated vendor to solve this ultimately.
One of the things that sort of relates to this that I always feel like this team has done a really good job of is to identify what's the hard, valuable problem the customer has, and then really go for solving that and not solving something incremental. I mean, I remember 9-10 months ago, I was even pushing a bit of like, hey, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to just do chat on top of observability data. And we could get a product up and running, we could start growing that business. And Spiros, you and Mayank from like day one were like the problem our customers have. They have many problems, but the first problem we're focused on is when there's an outage, how do we identify the root cause? And that's a really hard problem. I mean, even very senior software reliability engineers struggle with that problem. But that's what we think the promise of agents is. And I think you went and hired the right people. You really stayed focused on that. You took more time to build that right product. And now you're able to serve customers like Coinbase and DoorDash and others with something that actually solves the most important problem. And I've just always really admired that about this team. I'm reminded of a board meeting where Mayank was complaining about DoorDash. And I said, why are we messing around with DoorDash? Like, let's go find easier customers. And Mike said, no, until we can solve DoorDash's problem, that's the bar we have to hold for ourselves because that's what our customers deserve. And that's a very distinctive, I think, quality in a world where a lot of founders and teams are just looking for the low-hanging fruit, but maybe not focus on like really the depth of product they're building or the importance of the problem they're solving.
You have to enjoy pain if you start for companies.
Yeah.
But I think, to your point, I think like a few things that have been true in how we decided what to build and how to evolve the product. Having the experience, right, of like as an engineer and managing large engineering teams, I saw firsthand, right, what is really painful is when something goes wrong, right, and you're under pressure, whether you succeed or fail, or whether let's say maybe the customer suffer as a result of your actions, it's all up to you, right? So it is the part of the job that is not pleasant and no engineer wants to do, right? So to us, it was important essentially to solve problems that are valuable and important, but also make a difference to the people doing the work. And of course, models that can create code is a very valuable thing, but also that's the pleasant part of the job, I would say, right? If we can take away all the stressful and painful and toil from software engineering, I think we can make the job better, and I think we can allow people to go focus on the things that they enjoy and maybe have better outcomes as a result.
So Spiros, it's been almost 2 years since you started Resolve. Like a lot stayed the same, the importance of the problem, et cetera, but what's changed?
Obviously technology changed a lot, right? But one observation I had, I was just in Davos, and I had the chance to speak to a lot of CIOs. And I think one change I've seen happening is that, let's say the CIO and the CTO in organizations has become a lot more important. And especially if you look at like traditional enterprises, the CIO is potentially the most important executive at this point because they are the ones who are tasked with bringing AI into the business. And no matter what the business is, it's going to come through technology, right? So one observation I have is that, AI is everywhere. The CIO's role is much more important. And of course, building more is very valuable. But now the question I faced, or I was asked many times in last week is, okay, what do we do now with all this code, right? What do we do with all these applications that we're pushing to production on top of all the existing systems we had before? And how do we essentially deal with that? And how do we, at the end of the day, achieve like 10x acceleration across the entire software engineering lifecycle, right? Not just in how we write code.
So what do you tell them right now? What can you do for them?
I told them like just get Resolve.
How many did you win last week?
Just get Resolve and all your problems are going to be solved. I think I'll tell you, right? Actually, one difference between maybe the coding side of software engineering and the running side of software engineering, the production is messy. You're dealing with many, many different systems, fragmentation of data. The business usually gets delivered through software, right? And every mistake matters a lot more there, right? You don't have the chance to kind of iterate and improve things. So I do think it takes a different approach to how you build a product and a company. We live and die as a company by the success of our customers and how well the product works in production, right? this is not something you experiment with, right? This is something you run your business with. And we want to build AI that does that for you, right? And delivers reliably.
Yeah, I think getting that balance right. I mean, obviously the end goal is to almost put this on autopilot as much as you can, right? Sort of set and forget. You can't get there on day one, but making the right decisions around, when do you escalate to a person? How much control do you give a person? Transparency is super important. Tell somebody when you have a high degree of certainty that it's working, and if you're not quite sure, you got to let the person know, okay, this is my guess of what the issue here is, right? But I think you've talked about this a lot when we did our diligence, right? But getting that balance right is super important, because you get it wrong once, you're going to lose the enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, my thesis on this is the following, right? Maybe in 3 years from now, AI is going to be able to do superhuman work, let's say, right? When it comes to software engineering and other tasks. Hopefully that's going to be great for all of us in humanity. But getting from here to there requires creating a lot of trust. It requires building a product with a form factor that people will use every time. Yeah. And why that's important? That's important because you're not dealing with something that is like giving you an answer that might be wrong or right, and then you don't know when to trust it and when not. We are trying to build a product that people use every time. It tries to get you to an answer every time if possible, but if it doesn't, it tries not to mislead you also, right? And you work with Resolve. One of the things I'm proud about is like our customers are using Resolve every time. Yeah. Whether Resolve gets you to the full answer and does the work for you, or whether you have to work with Resolve to get to that answer, right? Maybe 10, 20, 30% of the time. And I think that's a very important form factor, and I think that's one of the things we have done well, almost from first principles, in figuring out what is the right form factor for an AI product. But this was my experience. You interact with a lot of CIOs and CEOs also. What do you see from your vantage point?
One thing that, just actually starting at 30,000 feet is, I feel that over the last even 6 months, the importance of the CIO is completely elevated inside companies. Because, and Spiros, you were sharing some more anecdotes with me about your time in Davos, but every CEO is focused on making their organization an AI first, AI native organization, and the CIO is the partner of the CEO that's going to enable that. So just, it's worth noting, like, CIOs have always been important, but I think they've never been as important as they are right now in this AI wave. Now, I think they're trying to make sense of, how do I accelerate the productivity of my organization, but in a way that's very real and very substantial. And one of the questions we often get is, like, how do we measure the productivity of our AI investments? And that's where I think there's also a lot of sort of hype in the ecosystem that's sort of not important. Like, the classic one is like, oh, well, I can write X more lines of code. And it's like, okay, but does that actually mean I'm more productive? Is the code even good? Like, yeah, bad developers can write lots of code. And I think that's where I like what we're doing at Resolve. And it's the positive feedback I hear from CIOs, even before they've used the product, which is, okay, I understand how this directly drives a core business KPI I care about, right? Like, maybe it's amount of uptime, maybe it's MTTR when there's an incident, but I like that your AI is directly coupled to a business KPI and I can measure it. And I think that is the characteristic of company and product that's going to do well, which is can come into an environment and actually move the needle on an objective business metric.
Yeah, actually, to that point, one thing I'm proud about is, or maybe my team is sad about, is we never tapped into AI budgets.
Yeah.
Because, you always hear about like these AI projects and, we never seen them in practice, right? Because we always go in and, the first question we're asked is, okay, can you improve reliability, right? Or can you improve like, how much time are engineers spending running production versus building? And this is always usually the goal that we're setting with our customers, or the outcome we're trying to achieve, right? And to your point, I think AI which is durable, it's not going to be just about, let's say, the hype. It's going to be about making a difference to important business metrics. And I do think that's our goal with Resolve. And I think we've been able to do it quite well with our customers.
I mean, this is a small anecdote, but one other thing that we've seen is, with a lot of these AI tools, sort of a lot of the lines within organizations are starting to blur. There used to be a lot more fragmentation. The engineering team would do this, and then the observability team would do that, and be pretty separate. I was in a board meeting yesterday with one of my portfolio companies, and they're going through just a massive product sprint right now, right? This year is all about, for them, going multi-product and building a lot on top of the existing kind of core product. And the entire team is on Cloud Code. And the CEO, every night, he says from midnight to 1 a.m., he's in Cloud Code and just sort of observes like what's happened throughout the day, who's worked on what, how much have we developed, and he's not a developer. He's actually a physician. Right, so but all of a sudden the transparency is a lot higher, right? And I remember when we had at our sessions, you demoed the product for us, right? You also talked a bit about, it's not just our engineering team that lives in Resolve. Like you now all of a sudden have lots more people actually leveraging Resolve.
You remember
Just talk about that. I think it's really
asked
cool.
you what percent of people at Resolve do you think use Resolve, right?
Yeah, I mean, talk about that. I think it's such a cool story.
I think that, the other surprise to us in building Resolve was that we started by trying to make software more reliable, right? To have agents that can be on call, that can assist when something goes wrong. But as we deploy these agents internally in our customers, we saw that people started using them for all sorts of other things. Because essentially, once you have this agentic interface to your production data, which again is your infrastructure, your telemetry, your code, sometimes like user traffic, sometimes even databases, you have all these questions that previously you had to go to a developer, interrupt them from what they're doing to get your question answered. So today at Resolve, actually, like 95% of the people probably are daily users of the product, because they maybe are in sales and they have a question about a customer, right? And they go to Resolve and how does it behave? Or maybe they're in product and they're trying to make a change to Resolve itself to track data better or something, right? Usually all those go through Resolve, or a combination, let's say, of Resolve and a coding agent like Cloud Code, where one gives them the knowledge of the production and the other one makes the change that they're aiming to do in code.
Yeah, I mean, it really just gives a whole different level of agency to individuals, right? I think it's a massive paradigm shift.
Spiros, one of the things you often talk about that I'm curious for you to expand on is just like how hard it is to build agents. And I think you've even used the phrasing at times like, are we an agent lab, as sort of one example. Like, what have you learned as the products really come to life, even in the last few months, around building effective and robust agents?
Let's say when you're building agents for unserved data, right? Maybe it's customer support data, or maybe it's code. It's a very hard problem, right? But typically you're dealing with kind of one agentic loop with some context management and probably like 10, 20 tools. In our case, one thing that makes this very, very hard is you have to deal with all the different types of data in a very complex kind of knowledge and memory system, right? Because obviously production is very complicated and it's not documented, as I was describing. So I think we pushed kind of the boundaries of what we can do with agents, right? Because not only you have to build all these agents with their tools, but also you have to coordinate across all of them, right? So I think many of the things we have to figure out were not done before. So to be honest, it's not even clear today to me how far you can go with existing model capabilities and agents on top, because obviously, after a few minutes of exploration, the model starts failing, right? And, I think we had to build a lot of harness, a lot of infrastructure, do a lot of work around models that, in my opinion, is original, it's research, right? That's why we thought of ourselves as an agents lab. But honestly, the way I think about ourselves is like, agents and models lab, right? Because what we're seeing now is that with all that work we've done, let's say, at the agentic layer and the tools layer, we're still hitting the wall, right? Because a lot of this data is outside of the training set. So now we started going into the model to both solve specific problems, but also to improve the reasoning and how far and how long models can reason about the problem. I'm glad we're here, and I'll tell you how it started, by the way. Like it was before you joined the board, Sebastian. We had a board meeting at the end of Q3, and at the end of the board meeting, Sam comes to me and says, "How about Greylock lead the Series A now?" And I don't know. I know how often that happens, right? But what made you say that?
Well, no, all the other entrepreneurs are going to wonder what's happening. No, it's so interesting. Like, I've been in venture for about a decade, and I've worked with so many teams, different founders, and Spiros. One of the things I love working about you is I feel like we've also become good friends, and I think it's just the start. But I remember there was a board meeting before that board meeting where you guys were like, we're seeing signs of life of the product, but like the product's not yet doing the things we know we're capable of doing. And I think Rushin was in the board meeting, our head of AI and engineering, and he said by September 15th, this is going to, we have this new architecture we're unveiling, and it's going to completely transform the efficacy of the product. So I walked out with, my partner Corinne, who works on Resolve with me, and I said, there's no way by September 15th. This thing is, we have so much work to do. And so, we went and came back, and the first thing you showed in that board meeting was actually, Sebastian, what you were alluding to, which is, I think you showed this usage chart of Resolve inside Resolve. And that to me is like the truest tell, right? Because nobody here needs to use the product, right? And everybody inside the company was using it. And then you guys started talking through all the different customers that were signing. And I think that was the moment where it hit for me that it had sort of, and I think this is kind of, and Sebastian, you probably have an interesting perspective given you've done a lot of these AI companies. It seems like there's a moment where the capability curve kind of hits, right? And it has to do with the company, how they think about the model, the harness, and it hit for you guys. And this has never been a company that's been demand constrained. If anything, like, my sense has always been like anyone we introduce you to is ready for the product the moment the efficacy's there. And so when I saw that, I was like, hey, could we lead the Series A? I was fortunate you allowed us to increase our investment as part of the round that came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring up the example of internal usage, right? I mean, that's exactly what happened with Cloud Code initially, right? That was entirely internally used. It wasn't even meant to be an external product, and then it was used so much that all of a sudden people, this should probably be, a product for folks outside of it too. So it sounds like something very similar happened here as well, right? I mean, for us,
you're a growth investor also, right?
I am a growth investor, right?
What is your take on this?
Yeah, and I mean, for us, it's we look for these signs that, companies just like about to inflect. And we have the luxury of seeing everybody in the space. We've looked at every company in the space, right? We can follow folks like Saam. And I think what became really clear is come Q3, you talk to customers, the tone in how they describe the product was different. They could finally start to see real ROI. They could tell us like, this is how much time we're spending or saving rather, right? This is the changes in MTTR, et cetera, that we're seeing. So there's that element. You start to see 7-figure contracts. That's super rare. You're starting to see it happen in large enterprises, not just startups. That's super rare. And then we saw, we saw you act in ways that showed us that you believe it's happening, right? Because we started to see you change the pace on hiring. We started to see you change the pace on hiring in the sales side in particular. I mean, that's the best signal, right? Like, we can do all the work we want to do. Ultimately, you have a much better lens into this is really working, right? And we started to see all those signals outside in. And again, then we were able to come to you with I hope, a pretty informed opinion, right? And ultimately, we convince you to take our money.
Listen, we love working with both of you, right? And like Sam and I have been knowing each other for a while. We're friends. I think we're becoming friends as well, Sebastian. We had a lot of investors who wanted to invest. It's a very unique position to be as a founder, and I'm grateful for it. But like you said, we saw, and I think this is maybe unique to AI to some extent, right? Traditionally, when you're trying to build products, the evolution was more linear, right? The improvement was more linear and more predictable. With AI, we had these inflection points, and we hit an inflection point, probably 6 months ago, and we hit a few more of these. Because I think what's happening is, once you get the form factor, the agent infrastructure, the agents themselves, the models you use, right? And it's many things that you need to get right. But once all of these things align, the product works, right? And
then you got to go. And that's why you raised $125 million for Series A, which is not normal, right? So,
yes. How, I guess, as an amount of money, I think you've done bigger investments, but I was looking at the statistics. This is the 3rd largest Series A Lightspeed has ever done. And I think it's, as a seed round, it was, I think, one of the 2 biggest seed rounds.
Correct.
Greylock ever did.
And I think it's the largest seed and largest Series A in the infrastructure engineering and observability space. Yeah. I'm pretty sure, historically.
I mean, why do we do that? Look, I mean, I do 2 or 3 investments a year. So when I do them, I better make them count. But more importantly, we wouldn't do it if you do them because you see a massive opportunity, and then you capitalize a business in this way because you think there's a real window to capture that market. And we got to run really hard after it, right? But that's why you do it. Otherwise, you would take your time. But we really saw, again, this inflection point where the market is ready, we are ready, the product is ready, and now it's on us to capture it.
The other thing I would say is it seems like in AI, companies are able to grow much faster because if you find the right, as you were saying, form factor or problem, kind of way to solve that problem, the value you can drive as a company, and there's no better example than Resolve, is so dramatic relative to, let's say, prior generation software that the adoption curve looks very, very different. And so market leaders get printed much, much earlier in the company's journey. And to me, I think the $125 million, the quality of investors and sort of everyone around the table is a testament that Resolve has become the category leader in this space. And that's obviously evidenced by, most importantly, the customer quality, the revenue momentum, the customer momentum, but then you've now capitalized so you can go seize it. And what I'm excited about, Sebastian, you alluded to this, is it's a good problem to have that you need to hire a lot more in sales because you have so much demand that needs to go get service. I remember you called me and you're so I always ask you hey, what are things that are not going well? You're well, we need more people to help stand up these POCs and run them. I was well, that's a very good and solvable problem to have.
And by the way, if you needed a better sign, there's no better sign for So this is a moment in time. And just going to our website, and I do that every day. And I think the last 2 or 3 days, we've added at least one customer logo every day.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's no better sign than that for sort of this is a special moment in time.
No, like in like the last 2-3 months, I think we doubled the number of customers who are working with us in production. And to be honest, we're still the bottleneck, right? Resolve is the bottleneck. Yes. It's not demand, right? Despite, all the recent hiring, all the improvements in the product, I think, the acceleration we've seen is only like, it's going to be small compared to what I anticipate to happen throughout this year as we kind of remove some of the friction. And, at the end of the day, if you ask me, I'm really proud that these engineering companies that I admire, right? Like Coinbase, we talk about Salesforce, DoorDash, these companies rely on us to run their production systems, right? A very critical business problem for them, right? Like these are technology companies, their business is software. And, I'm really proud of the trust that they're showing us, right? And all the new customers that, are working with us, right? That's just like yesterday, we signed MongoDB as a customer.
It's awesome.
Very, very strong technical team, right? A very critical, mission-critical problem, right? They're delivering a database and they're using us to make it happen. One other thing that, has happened over the last few months is because a lot of this data, like I said, is outside of the training set, we have actually been able to get into as we added more and more customers, right? And we're now in the tens of customers. We have this data flywheel going, right? Where every time when you add a new customer, we learn something new, right? Yeah. And we got to some point to some critical mass of customers that, the product started improving, a lot faster as a result. And, that's one aspect. The other aspect that is very important, and the reason we decided to raise a very big, large Series A, 125 million, is because this is actually a very kind of engineering-heavy investment. You need to have enough engineers at both the domain and let's say the research layer to build models, but also is infrastructure heavy, right? We're going to be training models, and we're going to be experimenting quite a bit, right? And it takes a lot of compute to be able to do that.
And this is a dynamic that we've seen in other areas as well, right? Where if you build an early lead, you start to kick off the flywheel, and then it becomes harder and harder for others to catch up, right? And we are in the lead today, and I think if we continue to do what we've been doing over the last 2 years, I think we'll be in an even bigger lead by the end of this year, and possibly one that others are going to have a really, really hard time catching up with.
And one of the interesting things about our problem domain versus even code, or customer support or some of the other areas that have seen the kind of adoption rates that we're seeing now at Resolve is the data flywheel here really matters because the data we're getting is not in distribution of the models. And so I've just been struck by, Spiros, you have these graphs that show kind of our effectiveness over time and how much further we've come off the last cohort of customers that we've added. And so I like the fact that every incremental customer has increased our quality meaningfully because what it means is the value customers can get from our product versus any alternative, there's actually dramatic divergence.
And another thing that, I think who I'm proud about is that obviously the reasoning and the intelligence and the agentic capabilities matter, but what also matters in a market like this is your users are developers. You need to build a product that is easy to onboard, easy to use, and I think that's something we've done much better than I believe anyone else in this space, right? It takes a few hours to onboard Resolve, right, and making it useful. It doesn't take an army of FDEs,
yes,
or at least a smaller company to be able to onboard Resolve, right? And I think that gives us extra velocity, and we've seen this happening in many customers, right? Where actually I have 2 or 3 examples in the last month where a customer said, "Hey, I have this pain. I'm going to work with you and maybe another startup," and by the time they finish the Resolve POC, the other company has not even started, so it's over. So our goal as a company is we believe that software is the market where AI is going to have the most impact in the medium term, at least. Of course, we have seen this happening with code, but production is at least as big. So our goal as a company is to have the right interface, the best agents, and the best models to solve this problem. And we have now the capital to go invest in all the layers, including a go-to-market team that can deliver this to our customers. So I do believe by the end of the year, it's going to be apparent that this market is as big as coding, and I believe and I hope it's going to be apparent that Resolve is the right company to work with to solve this problem.
So, as investors, we think about what are the use cases of AI that are really going to go ubiquitous. And I define ubiquitous as every company in the world needs them and are opportunities for new companies to go serve. And I think if you look at AI broadly to date, there's been code, there's customer support. I think production engineering is going to be the third one. And in many ways, I think it can actually be bigger and more valuable than the first two. Because of the fact that most of software engineering is actually everything in production and infrastructure management outage. And then I think it's a much harder problem to solve than some of the other things that have been solved to date. And so I'm really excited that we've raised $125 million because I think to be the company for production engineering, you have to, one, become full stack. Spiros, you touched on that. But that's something that's evolved in my own thinking since we first got involved in business together. First, I thought we need to do a lot of work on the harness and there's more engineering and it's a harder problem than I thought. And now what I've realized is we can drive a lot of value by getting that stuff right, and we are today. But if we can actually go down into the model layer and build a full stack company with actual models purpose-built for this problem, with data that's relevant to these problems, the type of value, the interactivity of experiences we can drive for our users is gonna look radically different. And so you have to do that. You have to marry that with an organization, go-to-market and product organization that can deliver the product to companies across the world. And any company that runs software, if you call their CTO today and say, what's your number one problem? What stops you from being more productive as an organization? It's all the issues in production. And so I think this, when we look back in 12 months, we're going to see hundreds of companies in the world using Resolve, and it's going to be the way people interface with production. And I think maybe at the end of this year, maybe it's the end of next year, the way human engineers interact with production will just look fundamentally different. It will be managed by Resolve agents, and developers will be free to do the kind of creative development work that they're very good at doing.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think by the end of this year, everybody will refer to it as AI for production. I remember when we met first, I came in and said, I'm really excited about AI SRE, the AI SRE space. And you were angry.
I'm like, hold on a second, you're at the wrong place.
We're a lot more than that, right? And I think that's what it's going to be by the end of this year, right? And people recognize, yes, AI SRE is one part of it, but then people will do cost management and people will do, technical customer support and all these other use cases that ultimately make up, what is AI for production. So we're going to really find ourselves by the end of this year, and people all recognize AI production is just as important or more important as customer support and, AI coding, and we're going to have to find this new category.
By the way, I think one of the things, I realized myself in the last 3 to 6 months is that agents for production are, or at least Resolve is as effective as coding agents have been, let's say, in the last 12 months, right? And I don't think this is obvious to the people. And I think the impact of that is even going to be even more fundamental, right? Because we have all this software real estate out there, right, that we built over the last 2 decades that has been hard to manage. And then we have a lot more, software being created every day now with AI coding, right? And the answer to all of that is obviously not to slow down, is more AI, right? More AI that now helps run all this software, and that's what we're all about. And I think that's going to create this layer of abstraction for where software engineers, human software engineers and SREs are going to move a level up the stack. Agents are going to be managing production for you, are going to be doing all the work, and you're going to be managing the agents. That's going to allow us to truly move 10 times faster, right? Because we have all this generated code, and now we have agents that can manage all the existing software, but all this newly created code as well. And that's how we intend to use, the money we raised, right? To essentially build the agent infrastructure and the models to be able to do that. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.